The exploration fleet entered the dark system with engines low and lights dim. The captains spoke in calm voices, telling their crews this place would be simple, an empty sky with old rocks and a quiet sun. But the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the void itself was listening. Scanners swept in long arcs, painting the emptiness with faint lines of data, and the navigators marked drifting ice, spent asteroids. A thin belt of dust that glowed when the distant star caught it. Nothing alive. Nothing moving, nothing to fear. That was what they told each other as the ships glided inward like cautious birds crossing a frozen lake. Yet the air on every bridge felt tight and stale, as if the ventilation had slowed, as if the ships were holding their breath with their crews. And when the chief surveyor requested a deeper scan of Quadrant 7, no one argued. They all wanted the reassurance of smooth numbers and clean graphs. They all wanted the dark to be only dark. The deeper scan came back with a glitch, a small smear on the scope, so faint it looked like noise. The technician ran the filter again and the smear sharpened by a hair, a longer, flatter line, unmoving, unlike a rock or a cluster. The officer in charge leaned closer to his screen and tapped the edge with 2 careful fingers, wondering if the sensor had drifted or if some old echo was bouncing off dust. He ordered a cross-check from 2 other ships, and when their results arrived, the smear appeared again in the exact same sector. The bridge fell a little quieter. No one said danger. No one said unknown contact. They just shifted in their seats and cleared their throats and made their hands busy with small tasks, as if movement could keep fear from growing. They turned the fleet slightly, a gentle arc that brought them closer without advertising intent. Thrusters whispered. Navigation lights remained dim. The helmsman drew a dotted line on his chart to mark a safe approach corridor, and the comms officer opened a general hail on a neutral band. A polite greeting to whoever might be there. A greeting that floated into the void and returned with nothing at all. No ping, no handshake, only the hum of their own systems. The captain nodded and told them to log the silence, then asked for passive scans only, no active sweeps. Not yet. No one argued. The junior crew watched their screens and pretended not to feel the thin tremor in their legs. They were explorers, not soldiers. They had been trained for dust fields and mineral surveys and forgotten stations, not for shadows that sat still and listened. As the fleet drifted closer, the smear grew longer and sharper. The software tried to define its edges and failed. Each pass adjusted the outline only a fraction, as if the thing were too black to measure, too flat to reflect. One navigator whispered that it looked like a shelf carved out of night. Another said it looked like a cloud with a spine. The captain said nothing. He only raised a hand to quiet the talk and kept his eyes on the range numbers ticking down. The first assistant requested permission to ping with a very low power pulse, the kind that would look like background noise to anything with real teeth. The captain hesitated, then agreed. The pulse went out like a held breath released, soft and thin. It touched the smear and spread along it for less than a heartbeat. Then died. The return was not a shape so much as an absence of shape, a hole in the data, a place where information went in and did not come back. The technician swallowed hard and muttered that he had never seen a profile like that in academy drills. On the second ship, a science officer ran spectral tests against the darkness and frowned when the numbers came up too clean. No dust halo, no static cling, no warm edges. Whatever sat in that sector did not shed heat like rock, did not flare like ice struck by light. It sat perfectly, the way a closed eye sits, waiting, and in that moment a thought passed through several bridges at once, not in words, but in the quiet shift of shoulders and the careful way mouths tightened, the thought that this was a vessel and that the vessel was awake. The captain of the lead ship clicked his tongue once, a habit from years of flying, and ordered a halt at 3,000 clicks. The helmsman feathered the thrusters and the stars slid into a fixed pattern. The fleet held position like beads on a thread, and the shadow held its silence. They tried again with the hail, this time in older formats, packets so ancient they were taught only as history, a roaming greeting in commerce code, a peace flag in a dozen trade dialects, even an emergency call that said we come with no weapons live and we bring supplies. The void returned nothing, even the static felt thinner, as if sound itself was quieting to listen. A junior navigator on the third ship reached up to adjust her headset and realized her hand was shaking. She set it down on the console and flattened her palm so hard the skin blanched. On the fourth ship a pilot made a joke about ghost stations and no one laughed. Not even him. The joke lay between the chairs like a dropped tool and no one picked it up. The young observer assigned to the lead ship, a student from a minor guild, sent to learn calm procedure and cold science, stood near the rear rail of the bridge and tried to slow his breathing. He watched the captain's small gestures, the subtle nods, the way decisions felt like stones placed one by one across a stream. He wrote notes because writing made the minutes make sense. He wrote that fear is a shape that starts small on the edge of the screen and grows without moving. He wrote that silence can be loud. He wrote that the air felt like late winter before a storm, charged and delicate. He did not write the word human, but the syllables sat heavy in his mouth and would not leave. The captain called a quiet council across the fleet. Voices came in low and flat. The mineral chief argued that the contact could be a derelict superstructure, a broken refinery, a mothballed defense plate from an old war. The security officer said it could be a trap, a heat-sink hull waiting for a dumb approach. The medic said hearts were beating too fast and asked for calm. The captain said the fleet would advance by 200 clicks at 1/10 thrust. Lights low, weapons cold, drones ready but not launched. At the word weapons everyone stiffened. The captain repeated cold, cold, cold. This is a survey, and the order held. They moved, and the stars shifted like sand under shallow water. The smear became a line so black it felt like a cut in the sky. The student tried to see edges and saw only the idea of edges. He blinked and the shape looked bigger. He blinked again and it looked the same. His stomach turned the way it did when a ship crested a gravity ripple. He thought of the first tales he had heard as a child. Stories traded in markets about a species that built ships like knives and hearts like storms. Stories he had laughed at because they sounded like boasts told by drunks. Now the stories stood in front of him and said nothing at all. On the 10th minute of the slow approach, the shadow changed, not by moving, but by admitting light. A faint glimmer traced a line no wider than a hair along its flank. Not a window, not a beacon, more like a seam woken from sleep. The sensor decks caught a vibration too low to hear. A hum more felt than recorded, a single beat every few seconds. The chief engineer whispered that it sounded like a heart that had been beating for a very long time and had decided to beat louder. The captain asked for confirmation across 3 ships. The same reading came back, the same patient thrum, the same thin line of light like a lid rising. The comms officer opened his mouth to speak and closed it again. He did not know what to say. The captain said say nothing, record everything, mark all channels, no emissions beyond passive, and then, carefully, very carefully, he said prepare a drone with a camera and a tumbler buoy, old tech that spoke in clicks and flashes, the kind of tech used when politics demanded innocence. The drone slid out on a soft breath of gas, no engine, no signature. It drifted like a dead leaf. Cameras open. Whispering in tiny blinks to the buoy that blinked to the ship. For a long moment the feed showed only the same terrible smooth darkness. Then the camera caught a notch, a slot, a crease in the night where no crease should be. The image tried to sharpen and failed, tried again and failed again. And then the crease became a canyon and the canyon became a valley and the student understood that the notch was a weapon housing bigger than their entire ship. Someone said a word that did not belong on a science bridge. The captain didn't scold him. The captain did not look away from the screen. The captain whispered power bleed to shields. Not full, just a skin, just a courtesy. Make it look like a reflex. We are not afraid. We are careful. Do not let the numbers jump. Let them rise like a tide, slow, gentle, invisible unless you stare. Engineers moved like surgeons, quiet hands, shallow breaths. The ship put on a thin coat of caution and pretended. It was still naked. The drone drifted closer and the seam of light widened. The hum gained a second tone. 2 notes now, a harmony of iron and patience. The buoy blinked, the camera blinked. The bridge lights looked too bright. Someone dimmed them and no one complained. Cold crawled up the student's arms as if the ship had become winter from the inside out. He imagined the darkness turning a face toward them though it had no face to turn. He imagined it choosing which ship to look at first. He imagined it already. Knew their names though none of them had been given. Across the fleet, crews moved more slowly, as if haste could wake something that preferred them still. The security officer checked weapon safeties for the 4th time and nodded to himself and disliked that he needed to nod. The survey team whispered about ore bodies and gravity wells because ore and gravity were safe words. The medic sent a fleet-wide reminder to drink water. Hands obeyed because obedience felt like control, and still the hum went on. The seam brightened. The black line became a black plane with lines inside it like veins under skin. And a thought passed through every mind not in language but in weight. The thought that they were being measured. When the warship finally acknowledged their existence, it did so without sound. A pattern of lights. 3 long, 1 short, 3 long, no color, no flourish. The oldest distress rhythm in spacefaring memory. Except the lights did not ask for help. They declared a presence. The comms officer stared at the pattern and found his mouth dry. The captain said copy and do not answer. Not yet, let it speak if it will speak. And as if it understood the permission, a second pattern rolled along the hull. Not a distress this time, but a handshake built from code so old it had fallen out of most libraries. A trade beacon that said we remember the first rules. We remember open lanes. We remember contracts signed with palm and palm. It was not a threat and yet it chilled them worse than any gun. The student felt his heart stutter. He knew the codes from academy history. He knew which species had written them and which had refused them and which had adopted them later for show. He knew which species had enforced them when pirates grew bold. And he knew the one species whose name was tied to that enforcement like a knot you cannot cut. He did not write the name in his notes. His hand could not bear to make those strokes. He only wrote the code numbers and underlined them until the paper thinned. The captain straightened, just a fraction, and let his shoulders settle. He spoke softly. We will back the fleet by 100 clicks. We will drift, not burn. We will show good faith and also that we are not a herd. On his order the helms made the tiniest of corrections. The ships slid backward like shadows retreating from a candle. Slow enough to be polite. Certain enough to be heard. The seam of light did not narrow. The hum did not fade. The warship allowed the movement. Or ignored it. Which felt like the same thing. Then a voice came, not through speakers but through the hull, a pressure more than sound. A shape of intention that pressed the bones and the teeth. And the comms deck converted it into tone so the mind could stand it. 3 words in the old trade tongue. Clear and smooth and without anger. Hold your course. The bridge froze. Even the air seemed to pause between vents. The captain said acknowledged in the same old tongue and felt the age of the words in his mouth. The fleet held still. The student looked at the captain and saw a man made of glass and iron at once. Afraid and steady, vulnerable and unbroken. The warship turned then, very slowly, vast surfaces pivoting with the grace of a mountain rolling in a dream. Lines of armor revealed deeper lines. Plates slid to show hints of wells and spines and teeth that did not need to show to be believed. A symbol glided into view along the long flank, simple, severe, a circle with a bar and a single star cut through it. The student had seen it in old books, stamped over blurred images of ruined pirate citadels and shattered raider fleets. The symbol had many versions across many worlds, but always it meant the same thing, a word that half the galaxy spoke in fear or both, and the fleet did not speak it. They only saw it and went very quiet inside. A timer on the helm clicked to the top of a minute and fell again. The kind of sound that normally meant nothing. Now it sounded like the tick of a countdown to a new kind of life. The captain asked for a wideband recording of the symbol, not to transmit, only to keep, because proof matters even when you wish it did not. The comms officer's hands moved with care. The lens did not flare, the glare did not wash the lines. The symbol stayed perfect and terrible and true. The bridge lights seemed to dim themselves out of respect or fear. No one ordered weapons hot. No one said retreat. No one said hail again. The warship had become the center of the system's gravity without touching a thruster. It did not threaten. It did not plead. It simply existed in a way that forced the fleet to measure itself and find itself small. The student realized his knees hurt and only then understood he had been bracing against the deck for several minutes. He forced himself to breathe and the air tasted like cold iron. Somewhere behind him the medic reminded everyone to inhale and exhale and a few small laughs shook loose and died quickly. The captain spoke at last, his voice even and almost gentle. We will log the contact. We will mark our route. We will maintain distance. We will not provoke. We will not run. We will show we understand rules older than our charts. He paused, then added, and we will remember this day as long as we live, across the fleet. Voices repeated the orders, steadying themselves by the rhythm. The ships eased their nose a fraction off the line, not away, not toward, just enough to show will, just enough to show they could decide. The warship answered with one more pattern of light, not a command, not a warning, a statement, 3 short pulses, a long pause, 3 short pulses, the old sign that meant eyes open. Then the seam closed, the hum faded to the lower note, the mountain rolled back to stillness, and the black plane became a cut in the sky again. A cut that now had meaning. The fleet drifted in their careful shell, no longer explorers in an empty system, but witnesses at the edge of a sleeping wave. The student lowered his pen and knew that every story he told after this would begin with this moment. The moment when the dark did not move and yet the universe changed. The moment when the aliens froze because they finally understood what they were seeing and why they could not breathe. And though no one said the name, though no one dared speak it into the room, they all carried the same word in their chests like a spark waiting for air. Human. The alien fleet did not retreat. They lingered in the dark system, their ships arranged in a wide circle as if to surround the unmoving shadow. The captains held meetings across encrypted channels, their voices strained, each trying to convince the others that what they had seen was not as it appeared. They spoke of derelicts, of broken stations, of some old construct left to drift. But no one truly believed their own words. Deep down, every officer and crew member felt the weight pressing on them. The sense that the black vessel was alive, awake, and aware of their every move. On the bridge of the lead exploration ship, the captain sat with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the faint outline displayed across his main screen. The warship had not moved since it turned its hull to show the ancient symbol. It had not broadcast another word. It simply waited. That silence was worse than any weapon, worse than any hostile maneuver, because it left the alien fleet guessing at every second what would come next. Some wanted to fire probes at it, to test the shape and confirm what they faced. Others begged to pull away, to leave the system entirely. But no order came. The captain knew that if they turned their backs too suddenly, the ship might react. And if they struck first, it might destroy them before their signals even reached the council. The young observer stood near the rear of the bridge, his notes shaking slightly in his hands. He was supposed to be recording technical details, scanning frequencies, energy patterns, and navigational coordinates. But his words were different now. He wrote about the silence that had a heartbeat. He wrote about how the ship had not fired a single weapon, yet every crew member already felt defeated. He wrote about the captain's stillness, the way even his breath had grown shallow, as if noise itself might awaken something ancient. The technicians whispered to each other in nervous tones. They argued about the readings, but none of them could explain the void they were staring at. The warship's hull gave no proper reflection, no natural signal, no waste heat to measure. One technician insisted it must be cloaked in some unknown material. Another argued that the vessel itself might be alive, feeding off space itself. Their voices grew sharper until the captain turned his head slightly. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply said, "Quiet." And the silence that followed was so deep that the hum of the ship's own reactor suddenly sounded like thunder. On the second ship, a junior officer dared to send a microdrone closer to the shadow. The drone was no larger than a child's toy, unarmed, only a camera and a transmitter. It floated forward, carried by a soft puff of gas. Its signal blinked faintly, and images came back, grainy at first, then clearer. The alien crews leaned toward their screens, waiting for the truth. The drone approached what should have been flat emptiness, but instead its lens filled with a surface so massive it seemed endless. The black armor swallowed light, but faint ridges appeared, rows and rows of plating, edges so straight they seemed cut by a god's blade. The camera shook, and then, without warning, the feed cut. The drone vanished. No explosion, no flare, no trace. Just silence. The officer who had launched it froze in terror, his claws tapping nervously against his console. The captain of that ship demanded a report. None came. The drone was gone, as if it had been swallowed whole. The image that remained burned in their memories, the glimpse of metal darker than shadow, the suggestion of lines that were not natural. Every officer in the fleet now knew the truth. This was no derelict. This was no abandoned station. This was a ship, and it belonged to the humans. The council received the first fragmented reports days later. Delegates crowded around shimmering holoscreens as shaky voices described the sighting. Some scoffed immediately, insisting the reports were exaggerated. Others leaned closer, their eyes narrowing, remembering old tales whispered in hidden records. The word human had not been spoken in the chamber in years, yet now it hung in the air like poison. Some demanded to destroy the data, to silence the crews before fear spread. But the files were already copied, already racing across the stars on hidden frequencies. The truth had escaped the chamber before the council could bury it again. Back in the dark system, the alien fleet debated their next move. A commander from the rearguard suggested they send a wideband distress call, summoning reinforcements before it was too late. Another argued that doing so might provoke the warship, might make it believe they were planning an attack. The captain of the lead ship sat in silence, listening. His mind replayed the moment when the vessel had turned, when the symbol of Earth had revealed itself across the hull. He had seen fear in many forms, but never like this. It was not the fear of death. It was the fear of something greater, the fear of standing before a predator that did not need to move to make you feel hunted. The young observer wrote furiously. His notes now were no longer neutral. They were filled with dread. He wrote that the Council would never be able to contain this truth. He wrote that the galaxy had lived too long believing humans were myths or scattered colonies. Now, he knew, the galaxy would tremble. He watched the crew around him, seasoned officers, hardened explorers, and saw the way their hands shook as they tried to maintain their composure. He saw the fear in their eyes when they pretended to be calm. He knew then that humanity did not need to fire a single shot. Their silence alone was enough to break armies. Hours passed. The warship never moved. It remained still, as if carved into the void itself. But that stillness carried weight. Every second stretched like an eternity. The alien fleet's supplies ticked down, their crews growing restless. Yet none dared turn their ships away. It was as if the warship had chained them there without lifting a weapon. At last, the captain gave the order to drift backward, engines at minimal thrust, a retreat so slow it could be mistaken for coincidence. The fleet inched away, their sensors locked on the black shadow, waiting for the first sign of pursuit. None came. The warship remained in place, unmoving, unshaken, as though it knew exactly what effect it had created. When the fleet finally cleared the system, silence filled their ships, heavier than before. They had survived the encounter, but every soul aboard knew survival was temporary. They had seen something they were never meant to see. They had looked into the face of a sleeping storm. And once you see such a thing, you cannot ever look away. The young observer closed his notes and pressed his hands together, trying to still their trembling. He whispered softly, words no one else could hear. We were never alone. We were never safe. And in the dark behind them, the warship waited still, silent, patient, like a beast that had shown its shadow and then allowed its prey to flee, knowing full well that the hunt was only beginning. The alien fleet drifted through the silent dark, engines whispering as they tried to put distance between themselves and the black shape that haunted the system. Yet even as their ships crept away, their eyes remained locked on the shadow, as though turning their backs might be the final mistake. The warship had not followed, had not fired, had not spoken again. It simply lingered in the void, watching, waiting. Its silence carried the weight of judgment, and every officer aboard the fleet felt it pressing on their chests. On the bridge of the lead vessel, the captain sat in his command chair, body rigid though his hands trembled on the armrests. He had ordered the slow retreat, told his crews they would withdraw carefully, that there was no reason for the human ship to react if they did not provoke it. His words had sounded steady, but inside his skull his thoughts beat like hammers. Why has it not moved? Why show itself and then do nothing? Are we already condemned? And this is only the waiting before the strike? He tried to banish these questions, but they returned every time he blinked. The young observer remained near the back of the bridge, his notepad nearly filled with shaky lines. He was supposed to record the procedures of exploration, routes charted, asteroids surveyed, energy readings catalogued. But his words were no longer neutral. They had turned into confessions, desperate scratches of fear. He wrote that the silence was a weapon sharper than steel, that the humans had no need to move because their stillness killed courage faster than fire. He did not even notice his hand shaking until ink bled into a blot across the page. On the second ship, an officer muttered to his commander that the warship was letting them go because it wanted them to carry the message. It wants us to tell the galaxy, he whispered. His voice cracked as he said it, and though the commander barked at him to stay quiet, the thought settled across the bridge like dust. If the humans had wanted to destroy them, they could have done so in a single breath. The fact that they still lived meant something else entirely. The crew understood. They were not survivors. They were witnesses. The The fleet continued its careful retreat, their drives burning so faintly they barely disturbed the dust around them. But halfway through the withdrawal, alarms flickered on 3 ships at once. At first, the crews thought it was a sensor glitch, but then the screens showed the truth. The black warship had shifted. Not fast, not aggressive, but undeniable. It had turned its hull just slightly, adjusting its angle as if to face them more directly. The alien crews froze. Hearts thundered, claws tapped nervously, tails lashed against decks. No one dared speak. The ship had moved, and that single motion carried more terror than 1,000 shots of plasma. On the lead ship, the captain stood, his knees stiff. He leaned forward and stared at the tactical display. "Hold position," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The helmsman turned his head in disbelief. "Captain, if it comes for us," but the captain raised his hand sharply. "Hold position. Do not run. Do not fire." His jaw tightened. "If it wanted us dead, we would already be dead." The words offered no comfort. They only made the silence heavier. The young observer watched the crew's faces. These were not new cadets. They were seasoned officers who had crossed void storms, survived pirate raids, and navigated the frozen edges of dying suns. Yet now they sat pale and trembling like frightened children. The warship had not fired, not threatened, not even spoken, yet it had stripped them of every illusion of power. He felt his own throat dry as he realized that fear was not just a feeling, it was control. Humanity had not attacked because they did not need to. They had already won. Then the lights came. On the flank of the warship, the same seam that had glowed faintly before now brightened with a cold white pulse. It was not steady. It was a rhythm. 3 long bursts, 1 short, 3 long. The crew recognized it instantly. The oldest signal in spacefaring history, the distress code. But this was no cry for help. It was a declaration. "We are here, we are awake, and we remember." The alien crews stared, their breath catching. The comms officer whispered, "It's not asking for help. It's telling us that help is unnecessary." The council delegates, far away, received the transmission hours later. When the first images of the light patterns appeared on their screens, the chamber erupted in fear. Some shouted that it was fake, a fabrication meant to frighten them. Others sat silent, their faces pale, recognizing the meaning of that ancient code. They had tried to erase humanity from the galaxy's memory, tried to paint them as reckless savages, but now humanity had answered in the oldest tongue of the stars. They had declared themselves not lost, not weak, but present. Back in the system, the alien fleet watched as the lights shifted again. A new pattern scrolled across the massive hull, this time a handshake sequence written in trade codes older than the council itself. The translator decks blinked in disbelief as the messages decoded themselves. They were simple phrases. Open lanes, ancient rights, we remember. The aliens could not breathe. These were the laws written when the galaxy was still young, the laws enforced by the first explorers, laws humanity had once sworn to uphold, before the council buried them in lies. The captain of the lead ship pressed his hands against the console, sweat dripping down his scaled forehead. He whispered, not to his crew, but to himself, "They know exactly what they're doing. They are not warning us. They are reminding us." His officers turned to him, confused, but he did not explain. He could not. The truth was too heavy to carry in words. Suddenly, the warship moved again. Its engines ignited with a deep rumble that shook the void itself. The vibration rolled through the alien ships, rattling panels, making screens flicker. The warship did not surge forward. It did not charge. It simply began to drift, slowly, deliberately, passing across their formation like a mountain sliding through the sea. The alien fleet parted instinctively, making way without a word of command. Not one captain dared block its path. The young observer's breath hitched as the colossal hull slid past his viewport, so close that it blotted out half the stars. He could see the lines of armor, the hidden ports, the faint scars of battles older than his people's histories. The ship passed, and still the alien fleet did not move. They were paralyzed, watching until the human warship's shadow faded into the void. Only when it was gone did they realize how tightly they had been gripping their consoles, how shallow their breaths had been, how hard their hearts had hammered. Relief did not come. The silence left behind was not freedom. It was a promise. Hours later, the young observer sat alone in his quarters, staring at his notes. His hands ached from writing, his mind from fear. He tried to describe the moment the warship moved, the way an entire fleet froze as if trapped in ice. He tried to capture the way its lights had spoken in codes older than empires. But the words felt too small, too weak. He set the pen down and whispered, "They didn't just see us. They measured us. And we failed." Far across the galaxy, the council screamed at each other in panic. Some demanded immediate war, others begged for surrender, still others tried to silence the news. But the truth was already spreading. The first confirmed sighting of a human warship in generations could not be hidden. And every world that heard the story repeated the same line. The aliens froze when they saw it. In the dark, the warship continued on its course, silent and patient. It had not fired a single shot, but it had already begun its campaign. Not with weapons. With fear, the council chamber had been built to inspire awe. Its walls were grown from crystal mined from dead stars, its floors polished until they mirrored every step, and its ceilings soared so high that banners of every species rippled in the air like sails. It was meant to project unity, to assure every being who entered that this was the heart of galactic order. But on that day, the chamber no longer carried majesty. It carried fear. Delegates filled the curved rows, their robes of authority fluttering as they argued. Their voices were loud, but beneath the shouting was panic, raw and unrestrained. Holoscreens glowed above the central dais, replaying the grainy recordings from the alien fleet that had first seen it. The image repeated again and again. The massive, black warship drifting into view, its flank lit with ancient codes that no one had heard in living memory. Some delegates shouted for the feed to be deleted. Others demanded it be shared across every world so that all could prepare. But everyone's eyes kept returning to the same detail. The silence of the ship, the way it had moved without words, the way it had paralyzed an entire fleet without firing a shot. The council leader struck his staff against the floor, a sound meant to restore order. Instead, it echoed hollowly, ignored by most of the chamber. His golden robes were dulled with sweat, his crest lowered slightly, betraying the strain he tried to hide. "We must not lose reason," he said, voice raised over the clamor. "We face rumors, fear magnified by distance. Humanity is fractured, scattered. They cannot possess fleets of this size." His words rang false even as he spoke them, and he knew it. The images above him glowed with proof. A delegate with scaled skin slammed his claw on the desk. Fractured? Scattered? That warship carried codes older than this council itself. Do you know what that means? It means they never died. They never disappeared. They have been waiting in the dark, building, hiding, sharpening their steel while we called them myths. His words drew gasps and murmurs. Others nodded, unwilling to say it aloud but knowing it was true. The chamber broke into chaos again. One winged delegate shouted for immediate war. "We must gather our fleets now. If we strike first, perhaps we can still contain them." Across the chamber, a pale, stone-skinned delegate shook his head violently. "Strike them? Have you lost your mind? You saw what a single ship did to our fleet's courage. If we attack, they will rise in fury, and none of us will survive." The arguments collided like storms. The young observer sat in the high gallery, far above the chamber floor, listening with wide eyes. He had returned with the fleet that had witnessed the warship, carrying his notes, his trembling hands, his hollow chest. He had thought the council would be wise, that they would see the truth and plan carefully. But now, looking down at the shouting delegates, he saw only panic. Leaders clawed at each other, shouted accusations, hurled insults. They were not rulers of empires. They were frightened animals, trapped by their own lies. Rumors swept through the chamber, spoken in desperate tones. Some said the humans had more than one warship, whole fleets hidden beyond dead systems. Others claimed the humans had colonies the council never discovered, vast strongholds built in silence. A few whispered of weapons that could tear planets apart, weapons humanity had forged in secret while the council laughed. Each rumor fed the next, until the air itself seemed heavy with dread. Far from the chamber, across the galaxy, fear spread even faster. In markets and ports, traders repeated the stories in hushed voices. On backwater worlds, citizens painted symbols of Earth on their walls, not out of loyalty, but out of fear, as if honoring the humans might spare them when the storm came. Some prayed to them, calling humanity the hidden guardians of old lore. Others cursed them, saying they were devils returned to claim vengeance. Whatever the words, the tone was the same: terror. On council-controlled colonies, protests broke out. Crowds filled the streets, demanding the truth. "What else have you lied about?" they shouted. Soldiers tried to contain them, but the questions spread faster than the weapons could silence. Why had humanity been erased from records? Why had the council insisted they were weak, reckless, gone? If the council had lied about this, what other lies had been fed to the galaxy? Back in the chamber, the council leader tried to speak again, his voice cracking despite his efforts. "We must unite. Humanity cannot be allowed to divide us. If we stand together, our fleets are countless. They are one world. We are many." His words fell flat. Delegates sneered, shouted, or turned their backs. Unity was gone. Each species now thought of its own borders, its own fleets, its own survival. Some whispered of surrender, hoping humanity might spare them if they broke away from the council. Others clung to pride, vowing they would never kneel. The observer leaned forward, gripping the rail. He saw it clearly. The council was breaking, not from war, not from battle, but from the weight of truth. Humanity had not fired a shot, yet the galaxy was tearing itself apart. In hidden rooms, council generals met with shaking hands. Reports streamed in from the outer sectors, patrol fleets refusing orders, soldiers abandoning posts, convoys lost in silence. No battles, no wreckage, only absence. They whispered that humanity was already moving, already striking, though no evidence remained. Fear itself had become a weapon sharper than any blade. The young observer returned to his quarters and stared at the stars through the crystal walls. He remembered the warship's silence, the way its lights had spoken in codes older than empires. He pressed his forehead to the glass and whispered, "They don't need to fight us. They only need us to see them." He knew then that the storm had already begun. And somewhere, far away, in the dark between systems, human warships drifted in silence, their engines cold, their hulls black, their presence hidden. They did not roar. They did not announce themselves. They waited, watching, patient. The galaxy was already theirs. The council chamber was silent when the humans entered. It was the kind of silence that did not belong in a hall meant for debate, where arguments usually clashed like storms and speeches thundered across the polished crystal. Now the silence felt alive, pressing against every wall, heavier than any sound that had ever filled the chamber. The massive doors opened with a hiss, and the sound of boots followed, steady, deliberate, unbroken in rhythm. The alien delegates turned as one, their eyes widening, their bodies stiffening. For generations they had spoken of humans as reckless, dangerous, scattered, even extinct. But here they were, walking with calm certainty into the heart of the galaxy's greatest seat of power. No guards had announced them. No permission had been granted. Yet no one moved to stop them. The delegation was small, no more than 6 figures in dark uniforms. Their boots struck the crystal floor like hammers against glass, echoing through the vast chamber. They did not glance left or right. They did not smile. Their faces were carved in stone, their eyes unblinking, their presence heavier than the banners of 100 empires. The council's guards stiffened near the walls, their claws gripping weapons, but none raised them. Even they knew what it meant to face these beings. At the head of the human delegation, an officer carried something in his hands, a black case, the same kind the observer had seen weeks ago, sealed with the crest of the council. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Delegates leaned forward, their robes rustling like leaves in wind, their antennae and frills twitching nervously. Some recognized it immediately. Others only felt dread sink deeper into their bones. The case was not supposed to leave the archives. It was not supposed to exist at all, not in public view. The humans reached the center of the chamber and stopped. Without a word, the officer placed the black case on the great stone table that had been the symbol of unity for centuries. The sound rang out like thunder. Delegates flinched. Some lowered their eyes. Others bared their teeth, not in defiance, but in fear. The lead human pressed a panel, and the case opened with a soft hiss. Inside lay the crystalline tablets, glowing faintly with captured light. For a moment, no one breathed. Then the words appeared in the air above the case. Lines of text, signed orders, sealed reports, all projected for every eye to see. They told the story of betrayal, of centuries of abandonment, of lies carved into history by the very council that now trembled before the truth. The chamber exploded in gasps and shouts. Forgeries, one delegate screamed, his voice shrill, but his eyes refused to meet the projection. Another pounded his fists against the table, insisting the files were incomplete, taken out of context. Yet even as they protested, their voices shook. The truth was undeniable. The council had betrayed humanity, had stolen from them, had abandoned them to die, all while smiling and calling it peace. The young observer sat in the gallery above, his heart racing as he watched history unfold. He saw how the light of the records painted the faces of the delegates, exposing not only their fear but also their guilt. He thought of the crews he had traveled with, of the terror in their eyes when they first saw the warship, of the silence that broke their courage. Now he understood that the silence had been waiting for this moment. Humanity had not come to plead. They had come to reveal. The lead human finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, carrying across the chamber with a weight that silenced every protest. You called us reckless. You called us dangerous. You called us myths. He paused, letting his words sink in. But it was you who lied. You who abandoned. You who built your empire on betrayal. He pointed to the glowing records. This is not our judgment. This is yours, written by your own hands. The chamber froze. No one dared interrupt. Delegates who had shouted moments before now sat trembling, their claws tapping nervously against desks, their wings folded tightly, their crests flat. The humans' words were not threats. They were simple statements, facts laid bare, undeniable and merciless. Another human stepped forward, placing a second tablet onto the table. Images filled the chamber. Burned colonies, fleets left to die, families abandoned. Gasps turned into cries. Some delegates hid their faces. Others stared, unable to look away. The records did not lie. The council had written them itself, never believing they would see the light of day. The council leader rose, his golden robes heavy, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. This chamber is for unity. Humanity, you cannot. The human officer raised a hand, and the leader's words died in his throat. The officer's eyes were cold, unblinking. Unity, he said. You called betrayal unity. You called silence peace. You left our people to die and then told the galaxy we were reckless for surviving. His voice grew quieter, but it carried sharper than any shout. We are not here to beg. We are not here to explain. We are here to remind you that we endured. The words struck harder than weapons. Delegates shifted in their seats, their fear growing thicker. The young observer gripped the railing so hard his knuckles whitened. He realized he was shaking, not from the humans' anger, but from the realization that they did not need anger. Their calm was worse. Their calm was the fury of a storm that had no need to roar. The humans closed the case. They did not argue, did not answer the scattered protests that tried to rise. They simply turned. Their boots struck the floor again, steady and deliberate, echoing like war drums through the silent chamber. No one tried to stop them. The great doors opened, and the delegation walked out as calmly as they had entered. For several long seconds, no one in the chamber moved. Then chaos erupted. Delegates shouted at each other, wings flaring, claws slamming onto desks. Some demanded war, screaming that the humans had humiliated them. Others demanded surrender, insisting the galaxy could not survive open conflict with such a people. Some simply sat in silence, their faces pale, their voices gone. Above them, the young observer remained frozen. His notes slipped from his hands, falling to the floor. He stared at the door the humans had just walked through, and he whispered words no one else could hear. They don't need to fight us. They only needed us to see. Far from the chamber, human fleets stirred in silence. Engines whispered awake, shadows moved across stars. Banners of Earth glowed faintly on black steel hulls. Humanity had spoken not with guns, but with truth. And the galaxy would never forget. The order to march on Earth spread across the council like a fever. Delegates screamed it into comms. Generals stamped it into battle orders. Admirals relayed it with clenched jaws. For weeks after the humans' silent departure from the chamber, panic had rotted the council from within. But now the fear had hardened into rage. They told themselves this was strength. They told their citizens they would crush the humans before their lies poisoned the galaxy. They promised swift victory. They promised that the council still ruled the stars. Fleets gathered in numbers not seen since the wars of old. Carriers, destroyers, frigates, entire swarms of fighters filled the void around staging systems. Their banners gleamed in the light of distant suns. Their formations stretched across starfields like rivers of steel. Soldiers drilled without sleep. Captains barked orders. Engineers slammed fuel into engines until their arms ached. The council spread the story that this was a cleansing strike, a strike to restore order. But whispers bled through the ranks. Every soldier had seen the recordings. Every pilot had heard the rumors. They knew what a single human warship had done by doing nothing, and now they were being sent to face Earth itself. In war rooms carved from crystal and lit with holographic stars, council leaders plotted. They traced lines through Sol, marking Earth as the core target. "Strike fast," one general said, his mandibles clacking. "If we cripple their homeworld, the others will scatter." Another hissed, "Do not underestimate them. We strike with everything. Half measures will kill us." The council leader, his golden robes heavier than ever, nodded stiffly. His voice was iron-coated in fear. "We burn Earth, and the galaxy will forget its silence." His words carried, but no one truly believed them. When the fleets moved, they blotted out the stars. Entire sectors felt the rumble of engines, the vibration of millions of tons of steel sliding into the void. Merchants hid in ports. Civilians watched from windows with wide eyes. Some prayed. Some cursed. But all knew the truth. The council was not marching to victory. They were marching to prove they were not already broken. In the Sol system, Earth was quiet. Cities glowed under clouds. Oceans rolled as they always had. From orbit, it looked defenseless, a jewel wrapped in blue and white. But beneath the seas, inside mountains, across the cold surface of Mars and the scarred rock of the Moon, human fleets stirred. For centuries they had waited, building in silence, hiding in shadows, sharpening their steel where no eye could see. Their warships had no need for banners or glory. They were built for endurance, for survival, for vengeance. On Earth's surface, in a war room deep below ground, human commanders stood around a table lit with holographic stars. The reports had come in. The council's armada was inbound. One admiral, his face pale, spoke calmly. "They will outnumber us 10-1. Another replied, her voice cold as stone, "Then every shot must count." The room fell silent until the supreme commander, a figure with eyes like iron, spoke. "They think numbers will save them. Numbers do not fight wars. Will does. They left us to die. They forgot us. But we did not forget them." His hand clenched into a fist. "We will remind them what it means to awaken humanity." The fleets arrived at the edge of Sol like a storm. Thousands of ships poured in, their weapons armed, their formations stretching across the void. Scouts raced ahead, scanning for human defenses. At first, they found nothing. The system seemed empty, silent, as though humanity had fled. Council commanders smirked, their voices filled with false confidence. See? They are weak. They are hiding. They ordered the fleet forward, deeper into the system, past Neptune's dark shadow, past Uranus's rings, towards Saturn's glowing bands. That was when the first human move came. From the shadow of Titan, black shapes slid into view. Warships larger than carriers, their hulls painted with void itself, their engines whispering low. They did not fire. They did not broadcast. They simply drifted into formation, silent and patient, blocking the path inward. The Council's scouts froze. Their reports came stuttering through comms. Multiple contacts, no emissions. They're just sitting there. Panic touched their voices. The Council commanders sneered. It's only a handful. Advance. Overwhelm them. Orders flew. The first wave of Council ships surged forward, engines flaring, weapons heating. Plasma cannons glowed, missile bays opened, fighters swarmed ahead. The humans remained still. For a heartbeat, it seemed the Council might be right. And then the void lit with fire. The first human salvo tore through space like lightning. Beams of energy cut across the black, slicing through Council shields as if they were paper. Missiles launched in silence, their trails vanishing before impact, and when they struck, entire cruisers vanished in blossoms of white fire. The Council's first wave broke apart in seconds. Ships spun out of control, wreckage tumbled through the dark, comms filled with screams. The commanders barked orders, screaming for their fleets to regroup. Thousands of ships surged forward, pouring fire into the humans. Plasma burned, torpedoes streaked, fighter swarms clawed through the void. For a moment, the sky itself seemed to burn. But the human warships moved like predators. Their formations shifted with precision, every vessel sliding into place as if guided by one mind. Their shields flared, their weapons answered, and the Council's numbers meant nothing. On the Council flagship, the Admiral watched in horror as ship after ship vanished from his displays. He pounded the console, shouting, "They are too few. Why are we losing?" His officers did not answer. They were frozen, their eyes wide, their hands shaking. Fear had already won. On the human side, there were no cheers, no boasts. Only cold efficiency. Commanders gave orders in clipped tones. Crews obeyed without hesitation. Every shot was measured. Every strike precise. They were not fighting for glory. They were delivering judgment. The battle stretched for hours, then days. Council reinforcements poured in, but each wave met the same fate. By the time they reached Earth's orbit, the armada that had once blotted out stars was shattered, reduced to broken hulls and drifting debris. The survivors fled in panic, their comms filled with cries of despair. From the ground, humans watched the skies burn with streaks of fire, the remains of Council ships falling into atmosphere like dying stars. Children pointed upward, their eyes wide. Elders bowed their heads in silence. They all knew this was only the beginning. In the Council chamber, the news arrived in fragments. Reports of defeat, images of wreckage, voices of admirals begging for retreat. The delegates screamed at one another, some demanding surrender, others crying for more fleets, still others sitting in silence, broken. The Council leader slumped in his chair, golden robes heavy, his eyes hollow. He whispered words meant for no one but himself. We should never have awakened them. High in the gallery, the young observer listened as chaos swallowed the chamber. He remembered the silent warship in the dark system, the way it had frozen an entire fleet without firing. He remembered the black case, the truth carved into light. Now he saw what that silence had been hiding. Not weakness, not fear, power, rage, judgment. He gripped the railing, his voice trembling as he whispered to himself. The war has begun, and the galaxy will never be the same. Far above Earth, the human fleets regrouped. Engines burned softly, hulls glowed with the heat of battle, weapons cooled in silence. No speeches were made. No broadcasts were sent. The wreckage of the Council's greatest armada drifted in the void, proof enough of what had been unleashed. Humanity did not roar. Humanity did not boast. Humanity simply endured, and in their endurance, they became unstoppable. And deep in the shadows beyond Sol, more warships stirred. The storm was only beginning. The galaxy shook when the news arrived. At first it came as whispers carried on broken comm signals, stories told by trembling survivors who fled the Sol system with their engines burning and their voices hoarse with terror. Then came the images, grainy recordings of burning fleets, wreckage drifting past Saturn's rings, and black human warships gliding through the fire like shadows that could not be touched. The Council tried to bury the reports, tried to censor broadcasts, but the truth spread faster than lies ever could. From the richest core worlds to the poorest mining colonies, every being heard the same words repeated in or in fear. The Council's armada is gone. Earth has won. On trade stations, merchants sat in stunned silence, their goods forgotten, as holoscreens replayed the fragments. On frontier worlds, miners huddled around crackling transmitters, whispering the name of Earth with reverence and dread. Soldiers in barracks froze as messages scrolled across their displays, listing the fleets that had been destroyed. The names of proud flagships, once symbols of power, were now reduced to ash and silence. No one laughed at the old stories anymore. Humanity was no myth. Humanity had returned. Inside the council chamber, chaos reigned. Delegates screamed at one another until their voices broke. Some called for surrender, others demanded another strike, and still others sat in pale silence, unable to speak at all. The council leader, once radiant in his golden robes, now looked like a man drowned in his own fear. His hands shook as he tried to strike his staff for order, but the sound carried no weight. Unity was gone. The chamber was a storm of panic, each delegate caring only for their own survival. The young observer sat in the high gallery, staring down at the chaos. He had thought he had seen fear before, on the bridges of ships, in the eyes of captains staring at the human warship. But this was different. This was not fear of a single battle. This was fear of collapse, of an entire order unraveling. The council was not leading anymore. It was breaking. And all because the truth had come alive in black steel. Beyond the chamber, the collapse spread. On dozens of worlds, riots tore through streets as citizens demanded the truth. "You lied about humanity," they shouted. "What else have you lied about?" On some planets, mobs stormed council offices, tearing down banners and burning them in public squares. On others, soldiers refused orders, unwilling to march against humans after hearing what had happened at Sol. Desertion spread like a plague. Fleets began to fracture, commanders arguing, crews abandoning posts. And all the while, humanity struck again. In the dark between stars, black warships appeared without warning. They slid out of shadow and cut through convoys with surgical precision. Entire supply lines collapsed in days. Council strongholds fell in silence, one moment secure, the next reduced to drifting wreckage. In some systems, the humans did not even fire. They only appeared, their massive hulls blotting out the light, watching. The council ships froze, morale shattered, discipline broken. Often, the humans left without a shot, and still the council's fleets tore themselves apart from fear alone. One admiral tried to rally his soldiers with a speech. He stood tall, his crest raised, his voice booming across the comms. "They are few. They are shadows. We are countless, and we will stand." His words barely ended before a human warship slid into view on the edge of his fleet. No weapons armed. No engines flaring. Just silence. The admiral's voice cracked as he tried to continue, but his soldiers were already breaking formation. Some fled. Others froze. Within an hour, the fleet dissolved without a battle. In the council's war rooms, the maps glowed with red. System after system blinked with warnings: lost convoys, destroyed fleets, rebellions on colonies. Generals screamed, demanding reinforcements. Admirals begged for orders. But there were no answers. Every move the council made, the humans seemed to anticipate. Every trap was avoided. Every strike was answered. The galaxy's greatest armada had been shattered, and now the remnants fought not against humanity, but against their own despair. On one border world, a council governor tried to calm the people. He stood in the square, his voice trembling as he declared, "The humans are only one species. They cannot fight the galaxy." The crowd did not cheer. Instead, they laughed bitterly, their voices heavy with scorn. One shouted back, "They don't need to fight the galaxy. The galaxy is already falling apart." The governor fled into his mansion, and by nightfall, the council's flag was torn down and burned. The young observer watched these reports unfold, his notes filling page after page. He wrote of colonies rising in rebellion, of fleets abandoning their posts, of worlds painting human symbols on their walls not as allies, but as wards against destruction. He wrote of how silence had become humanity's greatest weapon. He wrote of how every alien leader now trembled not at what humans might do, but at what they already knew. In his private thoughts, he admitted something he dared not say aloud. Humanity was not conquering. Humanity was not even waging war in the traditional sense. They were letting the truth do the work. The Council had lied for centuries, built its power on deception, and now that deception had cracked. Every strike, every silent appearance of a warship, was only a spark falling into dry grass. The galaxy itself was burning because it had been soaked in lies for too long. Far from the Council's heart, in hidden systems, human commanders stood aboard their warships, watching the chaos unfold. They did not cheer. They did not boast. They spoke in calm, measured tones, their orders precise. "Strike here. Leave that one. Let them collapse." Their fleets moved with patience, like hunters guiding prey into traps. They did not need speed. They had waited centuries for this moment. They could wait a little longer. On Earth, people gathered in streets and watched the skies. They saw the burning trails of Council wreckage falling like meteors, proof that the war had come to their doorstep and left victory in its wake. Children pointed upward in wonder, elders bowed their heads, and soldiers stood tall, their faces grim. Humanity had not wanted this war, but now that it had come, they would not stop until justice was done. In the council chamber, the leader slumped in his chair, his eyes hollow, his hands limp. His golden robes no longer gleamed. He whispered, barely audible even to himself, "We should never have awakened them." Around him, delegates still shouted, still clawed at each other, but their voices carried no meaning. The council was already broken. The young observer closed his notepad and pressed his forehead to the railing. He whispered words that seemed to hang in the air like prophecy. "The storm has only begun." And in the dark, unseen by most of the galaxy, more human warships slid from their hiding places. Silent, patient, endless. The galaxy had frozen when it first saw a single human warship. Now it trembled, knowing there were many more. The council chamber was no longer a place of unity. Its crystal walls still shimmered under the glow of distant suns, and the great banners still hung in the air, but the spirit that had once filled the hall was gone. What remained was desperation. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, their voices sharp, their faces drawn. Fear had already broken them, but now, under the weight of endless defeats, they tried to stitch together the illusion of strength. 4 days, reports had poured in, fleets destroyed, convoys vanished, colonies rising in rebellion. The council's armies no longer marched as one. Admirals refused orders, governors abandoned their posts, and citizens burned council flags in the streets. Humanity had not conquered those worlds. Humanity did not need to. Their silence had done the work, their presence enough to unravel the chains the council had forged with lies. But the leaders could not accept it. They told themselves the galaxy could still be saved, that if they gathered everything, every ship, every soldier, every weapon, they could still stand against Earth. This was the lie they clung to as they shouted across the chamber, clawing at each other with words that carried no conviction. At last, the council leader rose. His golden robes were heavy with sweat, his crest bent low, but his voice still carried the tone of command. "We cannot run. We cannot hide. Humanity will not stop unless we make them stop. We must gather our fleets, all of them. Every world, every empire. This is not a war of borders. This is survival." His words echoed through the hall. Some delegates nodded, eager to believe. Others lowered their eyes, their silence more honest than agreement. The decision was made. A final alliance. Every remaining ship, every piece of steel, hurled into one desperate armada. They called it the Great Assembly. Across the galaxy, orders rang out. Shipyards emptied. Civilian freighters were armed with weapons and shields. Old warships, rusting in orbital graveyards, were dragged back into service. Crews were conscripted from every world, soldiers pulled from homes and farms, forced into uniforms. The Council promised glory. They promised that this last strike would save them. But beneath the banners, soldiers whispered the truth. They were being sent to die. On one barren world, a young pilot boarded his fighter for the first time. He looked at the Council flag painted on its wing and felt nothing but dread. His commander barked orders, telling him that humans were weak, that they could be crushed if the galaxy stood united. But the pilot had seen the recordings. He had seen the black warships slide out of the void, had heard the silence that followed. His hands shook as he strapped himself in. He already knew he would not return. The fleets gathered at the edge of Council space, more ships than had ever been assembled in history. Carriers stretched in long lines, destroyers floated in layered formations, swarms of fighters buzzed like clouds. To the naked eye, it looked unstoppable. The Council leaders broadcast triumphant speeches across the galaxy, declaring that humanity would face the full might of the stars. Citizens who had lost hope clung to these words like drowning beings to driftwood. For a moment, they believed. But the humans had been waiting. Scouts whispered that black warships had been seen near dying suns. Merchants reported convoys vanishing in routes far from the main warfront. The Council dismissed these as distractions, refusing to see the pattern. The humans were not trying to stop the assembly. They were letting it happen. They wanted all of the Council's strength in one place. When the Great Assembly finally moved, the void trembled. Millions of engines burned, their light spilling across the dark like rivers of fire. The armada advanced in a wall of steel, weapons charged, banners raised. They marched toward the Sol system, convinced that crushing Earth would break humanity's will. But before they reached it, the humans struck. It began at the flanks. Entire wings of the assembly disappeared in silence, ambushed in systems thought to be secure. Human fleets emerged from asteroid belts and gas giant shadows, striking with precision and vanishing before counterattacks could land. Council commanders screamed for reinforcements, but their cries were swallowed by static. Within hours, the massive armada was bleeding from the edges, its formation stretched thin. Then the humans struck the heart. From the darkness between stars, ships larger than anything the galaxy had imagined appeared. Their hulls carried scars of ancient wars, their engines glowed with restrained fury, their weapons unfolded like blades drawn from sheaths. They did not roar. They did not hail. They simply opened fire. The void erupted in light. Human beams cut through the assembly's shields as though they were mist. Missiles streaked silently, detonating with such force that entire clusters of ships vanished in seconds. Fighters swarmed, disciplined and precise, carving through their alien counterparts like hunters culling prey. The assembly fought back. Plasma lit the dark, torpedoes burned, carriers unleashed endless waves. For a moment, the void was chaos. But the humans moved as one mind. Every shift in formation, every strike, every retreat and advance was perfect, as though guided by a single thought. Council ships collided with each other, their commanders screaming conflicting orders. Their numbers turned against them, their size becoming a weakness. The young observer, now assigned to watch from a Council command ship, clutched the railing as the battle unfolded. His heart hammered as he watched the assembly crumble. Ships he had memorized from charts, flagships of empires older than his own, vanished in fire. The voices of admirals filled the comms, begging, pleading, screaming as silence swallowed them. He turned to his notepad, but his hand refused to move. How could words capture this? How could ink describe the end of an age? Hours passed. The assembly broke. Fleets that had once sworn never to surrender fled in panic, scattering across the void. Some ships tried to retreat into hyperspace, but the humans were already there, waiting, cutting them down before they could escape. Others powered down their weapons, hoping mercy would be given. The humans ignored them. Mercy was not part of this war. When the battle ended, the void was filled with wreckage. Thousands of ships drifted broken, their fires dimming, their crews lost. The assembly, the council's last desperate hope, was gone. In the chamber, the council delegates wept openly. Some tore at their robes, others screamed accusations, but most sat in silence, hollow and broken. The council leader buried his face in his hands. His golden robes no longer gleamed. His voice was gone. He had no words left. The young observer returned to the gallery and wrote his final note of the day. His hand still shook, but his words were steady. The council is finished. Humanity did not destroy us with numbers. They destroyed us with patience, with silence, with truth. Far from the wreckage, human warships regrouped. Their engines burned low, their weapons cooling, their crews calm. No cheers filled their comms. No boasts, no songs of victory. Only silence. Humanity had waited centuries for this moment, and now they simply moved on to the next. The galaxy had thought itself unbreakable. The assembly had been its greatest shield. But humanity had torn it apart, and now nothing stood in their way. The storm had reached its peak, and it was not done yet.